All right, welcome back to the channel. So we got a real big fight. I'm gonna keep on talking about it. Terence Crawford versus Shawn Porter. Derrick James, the trainer of ERROL Spence Jr., gives a little bit of his insight on what he thinks about the fight. And it may be that ERROL Spence Jr. might have taken a little bit too much out of Shawn Porter, but let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanan. We're going to talk about this Terence Crawford versus Shawn Porter fight again. Just getting more information from people out in the boxing world about what they think about the fight to kind of give people an idea about what would happen in it. I'm getting a lot of questions. On one side, man, I got a lot of people that think that Shawn Porter is going to beat Terence Crawford, that it's his first big step-up fight, and really ain't believing that Terence Crawford has had the level of competition that's going to prepare him for Shawn Porter. We got another group of people that are saying that Terence Crawford is the man. He's the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and that he's going to run through Shawn Porter. He's going to knock out Shawn Porter. So, you know, honestly, man, as I hear people talking just in my comment section and in the live streams that you guys come to, it pretty much looks like split right up and down the middle. So, you know, I was listening to the PBC podcast interview with Derrick James, and even though I don't believe that Derrick James actually gave a prediction for the fight, and I don't want to mislead anybody or misquote him in any way, but he said when he was looking at the fight between Terence Crawford and Shawn Porter that he thought that Terence Crawford is going to be fighting somebody that ERROL Spence Jr. already took a lot out of. Right now, that is the first time that I've really heard anybody approach it from that angle. You know, I myself, when I look at the fights that Shawn Porter has had at 147 pounds, and the level of competition that he's fought, and you know, and how much trouble that he's been on pretty much everybody that's fought, I kind of looked at that and say, well, you know, then that means that he's going to be able to do the same thing for Terence Crawford, right? And Terence Crawford really hasn't had a fight against anybody that has had as much dog in him as Shawn Porter has. And the people that he has that maybe at one time were on that level were kind of diminished when ERROL Spence Jr. fought him. And honestly, really the only person I would say fits into that category is Kell Brook. Kell Brook was I think, #2 welterweight at a certain point in time. I would have put him right below Keith Thurman. I think Keith Thurman would have beaten Kell Brook at any time. You know, at the same time when Kell Brook beat Shawn Porter, I think Keith Thurman probably would have beat Kell Brook. So, you know, at that time, I would think he was fair to say he was number one or #2 welterweight. And, you know, Terence Crawford beat him, but by that time, man, he had already lost to Gennady, went up, lost to Gennady Golovkin, came down, got beat bad by in a very bad stoppage, a career-damaging stoppage by ERROL Spence Jr., right? And then he went on and then he fought Terence Crawford, and I just don't think there was very much left in Kell Brook when he got to Terence Crawford. So, you know, what Derrick James in this has said that, man, that, you know, wow, I hope that that's not true, but there is a potential for that to be the case because that was a really hellacious fight that took place between ERROL Spence and Shawn Porter. Shawn Porter did a lot better in that fight than a lot of people thought he was going to do. Coming in the fight, people thought that it was going to be ERROL Spence Jr. and ERROL Spence Jr. was going to mop the floor with Shawn Porter. At least a lot of people who are really big ERROL Spence Jr. fans thought that. I personally thought, I don't know how much of a mop it's going to be because, again, Shawn Porter has all these tough fights. But, you know, that it is the case, man, that you only have so many big punches, you know, that you can take in you as a boxer, right? And that at a certain point in time, you're going to have a lot of that. You're going to have that wear and tear. So with the battles that Shawn Porter has had, not just with ERROL Spence Jr., but also with Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, your Danis Ugas, Kell Brook. He even got dropped with a nice shot by Adrian Bronner. You know, there is a chance that accumulation of punishment may pop itself up with Terence Crawford. However, you know, from my point of view, I would have to see that occur in a fight before Terence Crawford for me to really give, like, me to taint any type of victory that Terence Crawford would have, right? I've said a lot of stuff about Terence Crawford over the last couple years related to the level of competition that he's been fighting, and I think that those are really fair things to say. But when I think somebody probably, in order to really diminish and I'm not saying Derrick James in any way is diminishing the guy's victory. What Derrick James is saying, I'm cutting off, and I'm just saying what he said was that Terence Crawford, that Errol Spence Jr. took a lot out of Terence Crawford. A lot out of Shawn Porter. And I think that very well may be true. But as far as us looking at what, credit Terence Crawford would get coming into that fight or going out of that fight if he was to beat Shawn Porter, I wouldn't say that that it should be discredited in any way, because Shawn Porter has not shown that he was diminished in a fight before that. Now, obviously, when you're in big wars like that, something's got to give. Shawn Porter isn't the youngest fighter, but at the same time, Terence Crawford isn't the youngest fighter in the world. And he's been clocked a couple times by Egis Kalvanakis. I never seen him take any long, sustained punishment in a fight, but, he's been touched up a couple times, and he's getting up there in his age too. I think actually Shawn, I should have checked the record before I say this, but I'm pretty sure those guys are around the same age, and there's a chance that Terence Crawford may be a little bit older than Shawn Porter. But I know that they were both amateurs in the same, around the same time, so they both are going to have some type of wear and tear on them. Now, what I think about heading into the fight is I'm certainly hoping that that is not the case, that we're really going to get a Shawn Porter who can really rejuvenate himself just based off of the level of competition that he's having. There's been a lot of times where fighters have looked diminished going into fights. And again, I'm not saying that Shawn Porter is looking diminished going into this fight, but I know that there's been cases in the past where it's kind of like, you think one guy is kind of done. Like, for example, one of the best examples, and Muhammad Ali's my favorite fighter, so I'm always going to, when possible, throw some of his fights in the mix, even if they really didn't work out in his favor, the reference. Like when Joe Frazier fought him in the third fight. Joe Frazier I do believe he'd already been knocked out by George Foreman. I don't think he had been knocked out twice by George Foreman, but I know that he had been knocked out that George Foreman had knocked him out at least one time. Muhammad Ali had beat him in the second fight in a convincing fashion, and it wasn't that close a fight because nobody ever really talks about the Muhammad Ali Joe Frazier 2, right? It was a big win for Frazier in the first, and they talk about the hellacious battle that took place in the third fight. But it was pretty much just the venom in the heart of Frazier and the mental toughness of Frazier that really turned that into a very tough fight, even though Frazier probably was not the best, was not, still in the prime of his career, right? And maybe, it's a case that Ali might have been diminished a little bit himself as well for other fights. But, there's cases where a guy really can try to will himself to a victory. And I think that that's more than likely what we're going to see with Shawn Porter. I think you're going to really see Shawn Porter pushing and trying to get to trying to get into the chest of Terence Crawford. And he's going to lay everything on the line. And I think it's going to be a really good fight. I favor Terence Crawford for it. I would probably favor Terence Crawford over Shawn Porter, whether or not, the Errol Spence Jr. fight ever happened or not. I just really do think that highly of Terence Crawford's skill. But, I'm looking forward to a really, really good fight. But at the same time, you can't deny that point that, Shawn Porter has really been in a lot of wars and Terence Crawford has not been in a lot of wars. So that with everything being equal, maybe that might tip the scale a little bit even more towards Terence Crawford in the fight. But that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.